sometimes it's just been so natural to us, we don't realize that we're, you know, maybe a strong way to say it is we're cursing our future. You can curse your future or you can bless your future. So be careful what you say.
I think I love where you say we need to send out some new invitations to ourselves.
At first glance, Joel Osteen and Lakewood Church still appear stronger than ever, filling massive arenas and reaching audiences across the world every week. But beneath that polished image, troubling signals have begun to surface. Attendance trends appear less consistent, donations face growing scrutiny, and longtime supporters are quietly stepping back. While the message on stage remains uplifting, questions are starting to emerge about what is happening behind the scenes of one of the most influential megachurches in America.
About that deadly shooting at Joel Osteen's megachurch in Houston, we're seeing new video showing the chaos Sunday as the shots rang out. Police say the shooter was a 36-year-old woman with a history of mental illness who had attended the church in the past year.
The incident that shattered Lakewood's sense of security. What began as an ordinary Sunday morning at Lakewood Church in Houston quickly shifted into something no one inside the building was prepared for. Thousands were expected to attend services as usual, with volunteers already in position and staff preparing for a Spanish-language gathering that should have followed a familiar rhythm of worship, music, and message. But that calm atmosphere did not last. A 36-year-old woman named Janice Yvonne Moreno arrived at the church campus in a white SUV, entering through the west entrance shortly before the service began. With her was her young son seated in the back seat. At that moment, nothing appeared alarming to those around her. It looked like another vehicle entering a busy church facility filled with activity and preparation. What no one realized was that the situation was already far from ordinary. Inside the vehicle, she was reportedly concealing a rifle beneath a long coat as she moved toward the entrance. The first interaction took place near the church's entry point, where a greeter attempted to engage and assess what was happening. Within seconds, that encounter escalated into a situation that would spiral far beyond anyone's control. She pushed further into the building, and in an instant, the environment changed completely. Gunfire erupted inside the church corridors, close to the main sanctuary area, turning a place known for worship and large gatherings into a scene of panic and confusion. People scattered in different directions, seeking safety wherever they could find it. Hallways and rooms that normally carried a sense of peace were suddenly filled with fear and urgency. At the time of the incident, 2 off-duty law enforcement officers were inside the building. Once they recognized the severity of the threat, they responded immediately and moved to contain the situation. The confrontation ended within minutes when the woman was shot and killed inside the church premises, stopping the active threat, but leaving behind a devastating aftermath. What followed made the situation even more heartbreaking. Her son, who had been inside the vehicle earlier, was critically injured during the exchange, along with a church volunteer who was caught in the crossfire. Emergency responders rushed both victims to medical care, with the child taken to Texas Children's Hospital, where doctors worked urgently to stabilize his condition through emergency procedures. As details spread, public attention quickly intensified. Reports began emerging about earlier warning signs, including concerns reportedly raised by family members regarding mental health struggles and firearm-related risks. These claims raised difficult questions about whether intervention could have happened sooner, or whether key warnings were missed or not fully acted upon. And as those questions spread, another one began to take over the conversation. How does an institution as large and well-established as Lakewood Church, with thousands attending and global reach through media, still face a breach of safety inside its own walls? That question did not fade after the incident. Instead, it became the starting point of a much larger investigation into how the church operates, how it is structured, and what systems were in place behind the scenes. And as that scrutiny deepened, attention slowly shifted away from the incident itself and toward the leadership behind Lakewood Church and the unexpected path that led Joel Osteen from a quiet, behind-the-scenes role into becoming the public face of one of the most influential churches in the world. How a shy son inherited a growing ministry. Long before Joel Osteen became one of the most recognized televangelists in the world, he was never the public face of Lakewood Church. In fact, he avoided it for most of his early life. While the church was slowly growing under the leadership of his father, Joel Osteen, Joel stayed firmly behind the scenes, working quietly in production rather than stepping into ministry leadership. Lakewood Church itself began in a far more modest form, originally led by Joel Osteen, who started preaching after a significant personal and spiritual transformation. What began as a small congregation in a renovated feed store in Houston gradually developed into a growing local ministry with a loyal following. At the time, there was no indication it would one day evolve into a global religious organization. Joel grew up inside this environment, but public speaking was never his strength. He was naturally reserved, uncomfortable in front of crowds, and far more interested in technical work than preaching. After finishing high school in 1981, he briefly enrolled in college to study media-related subjects, but eventually dropped out before completing a degree. Instead of pursuing formal ministry training, he returned to Lakewood and took on a behind-the-scenes role that would quietly shape his future. For years, he worked in television production, handling editing, recording, and broadcasting for his father's sermons. This role gave him an unusual kind of education. He learned how messages were structured, how delivery affected impact, and how media could amplify a voice far beyond a physical congregation. Interestingly, Joel himself has acknowledged in interviews that he never attended seminary, relying instead on years of observation and hands-on experience behind the camera. Despite repeated encouragement from his father to step into preaching, Joel consistently declined. He remained comfortable in a supporting role for nearly 2 decades, never imagining that he would eventually become the central figure of the ministry. That trajectory changed unexpectedly in 1999. After years of hesitation, Joel finally agreed to deliver a sermon in place of his father. It was a moment that seemed minor at the time, but it quietly altered the direction of his entire life. Around the same period, Joel Osteen's health was declining rapidly, and just days after Joel's first sermon, he passed away. The timing was sudden and deeply impactful for the congregation. What had been a gradual leadership transition instantly became a permanent shift. Without much preparation or formal theological background, Joel Osteen found himself leading one of the fastest-growing churches in Houston almost overnight. Early reactions inside the church were mixed. Some questioned whether he was ready, while others were uncertain about the future direction of the ministry. But instead of slowing down, something unexpected happened. Lakewood Church began to expand at a remarkable pace under his leadership. Attendance increased, television broadcasts reached wider audiences, and the church's influence began stretching far beyond Houston. What once looked like an uncertain transition started to evolve into a rapid transformation. And as that growth accelerated, so did the scale of ambition behind it. Because what came next was not just about continuing a church, it was about expanding it into something far larger than anyone had originally imagined, setting the stage for a bold decision that would completely redefine Lakewood's future. Inside Lakewood's boldest expansion move, Lakewood Church, by the early 2000s, was facing a challenge it could no longer ignore. Its growing attendance had completely outpaced its original home. Services were packed, parking was overflowing, and the demand for space kept increasing week after week. What was once a large local church was now operating on a scale that required something far bigger than a traditional worship facility. That pressure led to a decision that would permanently change the identity of Lakewood. Church leadership set its sights on a massive venue in Houston, the former Compaq Center, once a professional basketball arena. At the time, the building was no longer in active sports use and was being considered for redevelopment. But instead of seeing it as an abandoned sports complex, Lakewood saw an opportunity to transform it into something entirely different. After long negotiations and a costly leasing agreement, the church secured control of the property and began an extensive renovation project. The transformation was massive. Seating was redesigned, production systems were installed, and the entire structure was reimagined to function as both a worship center and a global broadcast hub. What used to host thousands for basketball games was being reshaped into a venue built for tens of thousands of worshipers and millions watching worldwide. When Lakewood officially opened the doors in 2005, the scale was undeniable. The 16,000-seat arena was filled, and broadcasts reached audiences far beyond Houston, instantly elevating the church's presence on a global level. But behind the celebration of growth a deeper question quietly emerged. Because when a church expands into a structure of that size, it is no longer just about attendance anymore. It becomes about scale, systems, and the financial engine required to sustain it. And that shift would soon lead to a closer look at something far less visible, but far more powerful: the money flowing behind Lakewood Church. The hidden business side of Joel Osteen's ministry. As Lakewood Church expanded into a global phenomenon, attention inevitably shifted to something far less visible, but increasingly impossible to ignore: the financial system supporting its growth. The scale of its operations had become enormous, with millions tuning in worldwide and tens of thousands attending services in person. Yet behind the uplifting messages and polished broadcasts, questions began forming about how the entire structure was funded and sustained. Joel Osteen has repeatedly stated that he does not take a salary from Lakewood Church, a claim that is widely reported and technically accurate since the mid-2000s. However, that detail only reflects one part of a much larger financial picture. His income, according to public information, is largely generated outside the church through publishing deals, book royalties, speaking engagements, and branded events that extend far beyond Sunday services. A major turning point came with the release of his first book in 2004, Your Best Life Now. The book quickly became a global bestseller, selling millions of copies and turning Osteen into a household name beyond the church audience. This success opened the door to more publications, international speaking tours, and large-scale inspirational events. Among these were his widely known Night of Hope gatherings, held in major stadiums and arenas across the United States and abroad. These events reportedly drew massive crowds, with ticketed attendance contributing to a commercial-scale structure of inspirational ministry. Venues such as large sports arenas became regular locations for these gatherings, further expanding his global influence. At the same time, Lakewood Church reportedly operates on a large annual budget in the tens of millions, covering media production, staffing, facility upkeep, and outreach programs. Critics and watchdog groups question financial transparency and fund allocation, while supporters argue the scale is necessary for its global reach and large weekly attendance. Others, however, see a blend of ministry and media branding in its worldwide inspirational messaging. And as these financial discussions continued to surface, they began to connect to something even more sensitive: people closely associated with the church leadership itself. Because once attention shifts from income and influence to personal relationships and public incidents, the narrative surrounding Lakewood Church becomes even more complicated, and that is exactly where the next layer of the story begins, involving those within Joel Osteen's closest circle and the controversies that followed them into the public eye. Public praise, private controversy, the Osteen household. While Joel Osteen became the widely recognized face of Lakewood Church, attention also began to extend toward the people closest to him, especially his wife, Victoria Osteen. Their relationship dates back to the mid-1980s in Houston, when Joel reportedly met her while she was working at a jewelry store. What started as a simple encounter eventually grew into a long-term partnership that would later place her at the center of one of the most visible megachurch ministries in the world. As Lakewood expanded, Victoria's presence within the church also grew. She eventually took on the role of co-pastor, appearing regularly alongside Joel on stage and in media appearances. She contributed to books, delivered messages during services, and became part of the public identity of Lakewood's uplifting and motivational style of preaching. To supporters, she represented warmth and encouragement, reinforcing the church's focus on positivity and emotional healing. However, as visibility increased, so did scrutiny. One early, widely reported controversy involving Victoria Osteen dates back to 2005 during a flight from Houston to Vail, Colorado, when a dispute over seating arrangements allegedly escalated into a confrontation, later resulting in a civil fine for interference with a crew member. Though there was no criminal conviction, the incident drew media attention and public debate about accountability in high-profile ministry. In 2014, she again drew attention after a brief Lakewood Church message promoting happiness and fulfillment went viral, with some praising it, while others criticized its simplicity within prosperity teaching. The clip became viral, sparking debates across social media platforms about the theological direction of the church and the balance between encouragement and doctrine. For critics, it was another example of how Lakewood's messaging was increasingly shaped by emotional appeal rather than deeper theological structure. For supporters, it was simply an expression of hope in a world often dominated by negativity. As these moments accumulated, they began to form a pattern in the eyes of observers. It was no longer about a single incident or isolated criticism. It was about how public perception of Lakewood seemed to shift every time a controversy surfaced, and how quickly those moments spread across global audiences. And with each new wave of attention, a bigger question began to emerge underneath it all. Was Lakewood Church simply navigating the challenges of being a global religious institution in the public eye? Or was there a deeper pattern in how controversies consistently surrounded its leadership and inner circle? That question would soon become even harder to ignore, because the next set of events did not just involve public perception, but a series of recurring issues that critics began to describe as a predictable cycle within the organization itself, when every controversy starts to feel predictable. As Lakewood Church grew in influence, some observers noted what they saw as a recurring pattern in how it handled controversy, viewing incidents less as isolated cases and more as a repeated cycle under pressure. A frequently cited example occurred during Hurricane Harvey in 2017, when the church faced criticism after initially saying its flooded facility was inaccessible. Despite expectations, it could serve as a shelter. As reports spread, pressure increased, and it later opened its doors to evacuees, with the timing fueling further debate. Another earlier case that resurfaced in public discussion involved a reported theft incident in 2014, where stolen funds were later recovered inside the building after being hidden within a wall space. Although the situation was resolved, it raised questions at the time about internal security and oversight. Then came the pandemic-era controversy, when Lakewood Church received a large government-backed loan through the Paycheck Protection Program. Critics questioned the necessity of the funding given the church's financial scale, while supporters argued it was handled within legal guidelines and later repaid. Across these events, critics highlighted what they saw as a familiar sequence: hesitation, rising public pressure, and eventual resolution. Supporters, however, argued that each situation had context that was often oversimplified by public perception. But as these patterns accumulated, attention began shifting away from individual incidents and toward something much deeper: the core message being delivered every week inside Lakewood Church, and whether it's still aligned with the reality surrounding it. And that question leads directly into the final layer of this story, where the focus turns from events and controversies to the belief system itself, and what Joel Osteen's message truly represents in today's world. The final question behind the Osteen story. At the core of everything surrounding Joel Osteen and Lakewood Church is not just the scale of the ministry, the finances, or the controversies, but the message that has defined his preaching for decades. His sermons consistently center on hope, positivity, and the belief that life can improve regardless of current circumstances. For millions of followers, that message has been life-changing, offering encouragement during moments of uncertainty and hardship. However, that same message has also drawn sustained criticism. Many theologians and religious commentators argue that Osteen's preaching aligns closely with prosperity-focused teaching, where faith is often associated with personal success, emotional fulfillment, and outward improvement in life conditions. Critics claim that this approach can oversimplify traditional Christian doctrine by placing greater emphasis on personal well-being rather than deeper spiritual themes such as sacrifice, repentance, and endurance. Joel Osteen himself has often distanced his ministry from theological debate. In various interviews, he has stated that he does not see himself as a traditional theologian and prefers to focus on encouragement rather than doctrinal instruction. His style is intentionally accessible, designed to reach people who may not typically engage with formal religious teaching. This difference in approach has created a clear divide in perception. Supporters see him as a voice of optimism in a world filled with negativity, someone who brings hope to millions who might otherwise feel disconnected from faith. Critics, on the other hand, believe the simplicity of the message raises important questions about what is being emphasized and what may be missing beneath the surface. And even now, that debate continues without a clear resolution, because as Lakewood Church continues to grow, broadcast globally, and fill massive venues, the same question remains unanswered at the center of it all. Has faith been strengthened through this message, or reshaped into something entirely different for a modern audience? And that wraps up today's story on Joel Osteen and Lakewood Church. If you found this interesting, please subscribe, leave a like, and share your opinion in the comments. More powerful deep dives are coming soon, so stay connected.